Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. I am thrilled to have another Andy in the back room with me today. He is comedian and actor Andy Richter. We'll chat with Andy in just a second, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please follow or subscribe and rate and review, and to be notified every time we post a new episode. So let me tell you a little bit about Andy Richter. He is an actor, a writer, and is best known for his long-running role as Conan O'Brien's announcer and sidekick throughout multiple late-night shows. He rose to fame alongside Conan in 1993 on Late Night with Conan O'Brien, and reprised this role on The Tonight Show with Conan O'Brien, which premiered in 2009. In 2010, the duo moved to TBS, where Conan ran for 11 years with Andy once again acting as announcer, writer, general sidekick, and participant in comedy sketches. Andy has guest starred in popular shows such as Arrested Development and Hulu's Love, Victor. His feature film work includes Scary Movie 2, Elf, Talladega Nights, Blades of Glory, Semi-Pro, and Marcel the Shell with Shoes On. Andy's also had a prolific voiceover career across numerous projects, including playing the role of Mort in DreamWorks Studios Madagascar films, as well as in the Nickelodeon series Penguins of Madagascar. Since 2019, Andy has hosted the popular podcast The Three Questions with Andy Richter, has appeared in the film 80 for Brady, and recently finished production on the upcoming film First Time Female Director. Andy is also a graduate of Chicago's Improv Olympic and Annoyance Theater, and a frequent performer at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater in Los Angeles. Andy, welcome into the back room.
Thank you very much.
So
Thank you for opening it up for me.
All the good stuff happens back here. So I love the fact that our daughters met at a sleepaway camp in upstate New York, Stage Door Manor, which is where the theater kids go. But I love even more that they bonded over how much they hated being at camp.
That's right. Yeah, my daughter Mercy, when she did that camp, which for people that don't know, it is like if you wanted, I mean, I don't know what the current analog is, but it would be like if you sent your kid who wanted to play basketball to Bobby Knight's summer camp. Like it's like a high stress, high achiever camp. And it's basically like a farm system for young Broadway performers.
Right.
It's very serious and very just comprehensive and consuming. And my daughter she was, I don't know, 12, 13 at the time. And my ex-wife kind of pushed a little bit to get her in there. She was on the young end of most of the kids in that camp. And within a few days, she was like, I like acting, but not like this. No, this is too much.
I remember getting letters from Sophie. It was like, I hate it here. I want to come home. This was like the first few days. I hate it. I want to come home. And then all of a sudden it was like, I met someone else and she hates it here too. And we've become friends. And apparently like Mercy was sitting in a hallway crying or something. And Sophie went up to her and then she's like, what's wrong? And it was like, I hate it here. And Sophie's like, I hate it here too. And then I guess that kind of got them over the hump. But it was every day I get letters like, I hate it. I got to come home.
Yeah.
You got the same thing?
Yeah. It was the phone calls mostly. And it's funny too, because I don't know where Sophie is, but Mercy just left for college. And within 3 days it was, I hate it here. But I was like, well, honey, that's first semester of freshman year. That's how it goes. That's kind of like a very, she didn't want to hear that her trauma was pedestrian, but I'm sorry, everybody goes away to college and it's like, I want to get out of here. And then they're out here and they're like, I want to come home.
Yeah, it's funny. Sophie still is kind of the same way too. She goes to school in Manhattan. I live in downtown Manhattan. And last year she had an apartment uptown, but basically spent most of the time in my apartment. And I would sit there on the couch with her and she'd be like, we got to send the rent in. And I'd be signing the rent check. And then I'd look at her and I go, you're here. There's something really wrong with this.
Right.
And so this semester she has another apartment, and so far she's doing pretty well. And I think she's maybe finally over that hump of, and she's uptown. It's not like, I mean, Mercy is where? How far away is she from you?
She's in Dublin.
Oh,
Ireland.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
that's pretty far. Yeah.
My daughter's like 4 miles away. So it's like,
No.
Sweetie, we can meet in 15 minutes and have dinner.
Mercy's going to a colleges in Boston, but they have a program that they sort of emphasize kids traveling a lot.
Right.
And one of the programs, and Mercy was drawn to it, was spend your first semester away, and then she'll come back the next semester for Boston.
Oh, this is her first semester. Wow.
Her first semester of freshman year, which I was like, I remember my first semester of freshman year and how I just came apart. I was like, I was 4 hours from home. I was from Northern Illinois. I was in Central Illinois when I went to college. So it wasn't that far. You could get in the car and drive. And it was, honestly, I don't think it wasn't 4 hours. It was about 2 hours. I think I had a car. I could have gotten a car and driven home, but I didn't.
What did she say? What she's not liking over there?
Well, she's discovering that a lot of people are really boring. I was like, yeah, you're gonna find that's the case. Yeah, that's true. And I think it's just adjustment pains.
Yeah.
It's just adjustment pains.
Yeah. Part of growing up, right?
Yeah.
So Illinois. So do you consider yourself a Midwestern guy still, or are you kind of morphed into an LA, New York dude?
No. It's imprinted on me. I think it's just kind of a sensibility or an ethos, or I don't know what you want to call it. But yeah, I seem to relate to Midwesterners. I still have kind of a allergy to pretension, or what I perceive to be pretension. It's very important for me to not be an asshole, which I think can be a very Midwestern sort of, you do. And it's, and like there's a lot of versions of Midwesternism that are, akin to other sort of regional things or cultural things. Like there's a thing called Iowa nice, which is, always nice to people's faces, but talking terrible behind their backs. And kind of that, how, can I swear on this podcast?
Fuck yeah.
Oh, okay, good. But how, bless her heart can also mean fuck that bitch. It's that kind of thing. Like that's the distillation of Iowa nice. And and it's not that Midwestern people don't have judgments and things, but there is kind of like, a bit of, as, Tim Wall says, mind your own damn business. So that is into a to each his own. I'm not going to tell you I think you're an asshole, but I think you're an asshole. That kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was going to ask you about Tim Walz. He personifies that Midwestern thing, which people love. And you get that because you probably understand it coming from that part of the country, why there is this appeal that he seems to have in such a big way.
Yeah, because I also think he represents this sort of a Midwestern ethos without the hypocritical kind of follow through that a lot of people have, which is like, oh yeah, we welcome, we're a small town and we welcome everybody and we take care of everybody. And then, and then there's the MAGA version, which is like that country song, try that in a small town. Like
right. If
you're an outsider and you come here and you, I don't know, try to speak your mind, we'll shoot you, and his is the real kind of the real deal sort of Judeo-Christian, where, we're here to help your neighbor, help a stranger. We're all in this together. If I have food and you're hungry, I'm going to give you some. It's all just, he represents the sort of the follow through on that ethos, as opposed to the tribal kind of version of it. And he's got an open mind. He lives in the Midwest, but he's got an open mind about the world. And, I haven't done a deep dive on him. But although I'm going to be playing him on Jimmy Kimmel next week. Jimmy
awesome.
texted me, and they're doing a sketch, and he asked me if I would play Tim Walz in a sketch. So I've done a little bit of watching him, and luckily he's not. All you have to do is talk a little bit with a little gravel, and very sort of emphatically, and it'll work. I'm sure they're gonna put some kind of prosthesis on me, which will help.
And so when you do that, or when you're going to do that, is that like a traditional acting role in the sense that you're going to be provided a script, or are they like, Andy, come on, and just you? So it's not necessarily your interpretation of him, and you get to improv it. And
no,
you had a serious improv background, but you got to follow a script.
It's just a script. But it's something I've done literally thousands of times, which is a late night sketch. And there is a script, but it's on cue cards, so that, you don't have to memorize. Because there's just that kind of train moves too fast for you to have to memorize lines. Saturday Night Live is always cue cards, because there can be changes while as we're coming back from commercial. There's quick changes. So yeah, it's something I've done. I haven't done it in a while, but it's something I'm very accustomed to, and it's all written, but there's always room for messing around.
Is there going to be a Kamala Harris in that sketch?
No, I don't know exactly, because I saw an early draft. I don't know exactly who's going to be there, but I know a couple weeks. I don't know if it was last week or the week before, they did a sketch where they had Haley Joel Osment as J.D. Vance, and they had I can't remember. I think it's Nathan Myers, Seth Meyers' brother, playing Gavin Newsom, and a very funny comedian and impressionist named James Adomian, who was being Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, and it was just madness.
And next week is the debate.
It's not highbrow political satire. Let's just put it that way.
Next week is the debate. So is it like a debate sketch, or do you not know yet what exactly it is?
I don't know exactly what it is. I think it's basically just kind of centered more on a Tim Walz interview sort of situation, with then people breaking into it.
Mind your damn business. All right. Well, that's going to be fun. I look forward to that. In high school, you were the prom king. That's kind of cool.
Yes, I was. It was very, it was an early sort of experience in, there's this kind of mindset that says, don't base your worth on what other people tell you that you are. But I find if it's positive, it's very helpful. It's very nice when people give you positive reinforcement.
Sure.
And it was a really nice kind of thing to feel like people like me, and not that I was running for office or anything, but it was like, I do try to be a nice person, and I try to, make my way through life nicely, and sort of like, and not step on toes and be liked. To some time, throughout my life, it's been to my detriment. I've been a little too easy to walk on. But it was very flattering and very sweet to that my friends and my classmates liked me enough to vote me into that.
Are there any official responsibilities and duties of a prom king? So the minute the prom is over,
whatsoever.
That's it, done.
None whatsoever. Yeah, no, you just get up on stage and with the queen, and I think there was a dance, and then that's it. Yeah, there's no keys to the city or anything like that.
Just the residual ego that comes from it.
Yes.
Which is probably the most important thing, right?
Absolutely. Well, you know what? I wouldn't call it ego. I would just call it reinforcement. I mean, it was just a nice, it's a really nice compliment. And when I was doing improv in Chicago we had a New Year's Eve party, and somebody had the idea to do our own little award show, and they made up ballots, and there were different categories. And somebody went to the dollar store and bought all these little rubber duck candles, and we called the awards the Duckies. And I won a couple of them. And that was, at the time, really formative for me, because it was just like I said, really good reinforcement. And it was basically, I felt like it was my peers telling me, you're good at this, you're doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you start performing, especially in Chicago at an improv theater that holds about 75 people, it's very easy to think, what am I doing? You know, I should be, you know, working a trade. I should be getting dental insurance, you know, and it really was a helpful thing that really made me feel like, okay, you know, I know some people do this for a living, so maybe I can too.
And when you were growing up, were your parents funny? Family, was humor a big part of your household?
Yes, my dad is very, very funny, and my mom's pretty funny too, but my mom enjoys being funny. And but my, you know, superstar relative was my mom's sister Pat, her older sister, and she just was as I said when she passed away, she insisted on having fun, and she didn't let. And she would corral everybody to that cause. Like, she would not allow a room to be sullen. You know, she needed everybody to be having fun. And she just had a winning personality, and, you know, and was just funny. And, you know, and when she was younger in Chicago, I don't think she finished college, but she worked in Chicago, and she was, you might call her, you know, a pioneer on the front wave of the sexual revolution. But at the time, I think she was just called a slut. She was a hedonist. She liked having fun.
Sex
she liked
positive,
men.
isn't it? Don't they call it sex positive today?
He was very sex positive, but she also just, like I say, she liked having fun. She lived in lots of different places. She needed, you know, stimulation. She was married 5 times to 4 different men. One of them she married twice. You know, she went back twice to that one. And she just was a wonderful person. And she really, I try and take her philosophies with me, into really trying to have fun, you know, to just trying to keep things light. And I try and keep things, you know, when I go to work, it is on a set that isn't mine. I try and have fun, you know, you know, it's like, keep the ball in the air, just keep the air light, and because it sure makes the hours go fast.
Sure. And when you were starting out in showbiz, was the family supportive, or they were like, Jesus Christ, there's no dental insurance in that? What are you doing?
Supportive with reservations, you know, like, even as far as after, because, you know, I got the job on the Conan O'Brien show, and that really did sort of, I didn't think about much about how supportive they were, because I didn't care. And I never had, sometimes I mean, I don't think I envy them, but I know there's people in my life and people that I know who have used, I'm going to prove to my parents that I'm good at this thing, as an engine to succeed. And I've never really cared that much. That has never been like a real, you know, a useful motivator for me. I'm like, well, I don't, you know, whatever look, I know they love me, but I mean, I don't care. I'm not proving anything to them. I don't need to, because they never withheld approval.
Right.
I always had their approval, so I don't have to chase it. But I did find when I got on television, I mean, it was as if I heard a huge sigh of relief, or like oh, okay, like this wasn't you haven't been, embarking on a terrible mistake. This is actually leading towards something. But even when I left the Conan show after 7 years to come out here to Los Angeles to try and work in primetime television, I told my dad that I had done it, and I had talked to my parents about the notion of doing that. And I told my dad that, and he said, oh, that's great. I know that's been on your mind, but you could always come back, right? You can always come back. If it doesn't work out, you can always come back and work for Conan again, right? Like, he still could not really conceive of taking that big of a risk and giving up a steady a good steady paycheck and, constant repeated exposure.
Do you think parents, when they hear that their kids are going into acting or theater or whatever, like in their minds, all they think about is, oh shit, I'm going to have to support this kid?
I think some do, I think some do, but I mean, I have 3 kids. I have like 2, I have the 23-year-old and 18-year-old, and I'm remarried, and I adopted my stepdaughter. And so now I have a 4-year-old. And so I have my son's out of college, and I have the like, I wonder what he's going to do with himself. But I don't, and he's living with me now. But I don't really sweat it that much, because I just kind of feel like, well, I tend to take things day by day, and I sort of feel like, well, he'll figure it out. And I mean, and I don't mind him. I like him living with me. I don't feel like, I don't feel like I could be using that room for something else. I love having him around. So, I mean, in 5 years, I might start to say, maybe you should think about, but it's been less than a year. He moved in here, and because he had his own apartment downtown, and he moved in here in January. So it's, I still, and he helps, he helps with the 4-year-old. He helps with cooking and clean, he's a good young man. A lot of the worry that people would have, like, I kind of feel like, well, he is a grown up, like, like his financial future and his, I obviously, I'm not going to let him starve, or I'm not going to let him sleep on the street, but like, that is his responsibility.
Right.
I mean, I would get help from my family, but nobody supported me,
right.
Like in an ongoing way. It'd be like, hey, I'm a little short for rent. I'd get somebody give me a little bit of money, but it wasn't like I just lived in an apartment that somebody else paid the bills for.
Yeah. It's also a different time today. I mean, it's harder for kids, housing.
It's very different.
I have 3 older kids from my first marriage, and they've come and gone in my house. And like you said, I love having them there, because I know it's temporary. They're just sort of banking some coins so they can go back out and live independently. It's hard for young people today to afford a place to live. So when you started out with improv, obviously that kind of thing, I think, clearly helped give you a foundation for the talk show stuff. But do you think that's a valuable skill to have? Like, would you say, if you're thinking of going into acting, spend some time with improv, because no matter what you do, it's going to help you?
Yeah, I do. Yes. If only for the feeling that you can handle pressure, you can handle the unknown, and you can handle when something unexpected comes up. Because when you get used to doing, and I mean, you can take classes too, but especially doing long form improv shows where you get up for an hour to 60 to 90 minutes to entertain a room full of people, and you don't have any idea what you're going to say ahead of time. Once you can do that fairly competently, there's not a lot that phases you. You're like, okay, yeah, if I can get in front of people and, and it helps that you're with a group of people. It certainly helps that you're a team. But it's a different thing. I wouldn't say everybody take improv comedy because you do have to be funny. You know what I mean? There's a lot of people. I think you can learn valuable sort of just public speaking skills and sort of getting over your own nervousness in social situations. But I wouldn't say anyone can get on an improv team and entertain people, because you do have to, some people are funnier than others and some people aren't very funny at all. And when I was doing improv, there were some of those people there, and it you can't say anything, but it is kind of like, well, I don't think this might not be your thing. There's lots of other things to do, but this might not be it.
Yeah. I've listened to a lot of comedians over the years when they talk, and they say, like, the best comedians, to be really funny, you kind of almost have to be a little damaged. Like, your life has to be dark in some way, because it's that darkness that you tap that you then can create incredible humor from.
I wouldn't want to say that, because I think that it could that kind of statement could be used destructively in someone's personal life, and I just don't think there's any. I mean, I've been in therapy for a million years. I've suffered from depression for a long time, been medicated for it, and I would never, even in the early days when I started taking medication and started going to therapy and was new to comedy, people would say, like, aren't you afraid it's going to I would just feel like, no, I'm not afraid of that at all, because if I have to sacrifice doing improv for being not miserable and for like living a normal life that doesn't have a cloud around it all fucking day. Like, yeah, I would trade that off, And then as time went on, I realized, well, there's no need to trade that off. And also, too, I do my best work when I'm not miserable. So I actually am probably funnier when I'm happier. So,
right.
But I do think that that comedy requires a bit of an outsider's view. And it does require somebody that has the ability to step out of their culture, their family, their society, their town, their school, and look at it in a way that is a bit kind of clinical or detached, or has a level of irony to it, because that's what a lot of funny is saying, look at this situation and divorce yourself from the feelings that are inside it, and my God, it's ridiculous, and that is probably, before mental illness, that's probably the more unifying thing that I think among comedians is, for lack of a better phrase, a bit of an outsider's, the ability to adopt an outsider's viewpoint.
So when you're on shows like Arrested Development and others, you had your own sitcoms. Did you feel that your early years in improv were really beneficial to you once you started acting?
Yes, mainly because they made me feel like I could do it. It made me feel like I could. It made me feel like I could host a game show, which I've done. It made me feel like I could get up in front of a room of people and talk. It made me feel like I could, MC the school's auction. There's just lots of things that it made me feel like that's, it made me say, I'd like to speak to the manager, or have an argument with my landlord. It gave me the confidence to be able to stand flat-footed and be myself and express myself. The acting part of it is, the acting part of it I did need practice on. And it was, and I don't really, I took a couple of acting classes in college, but I have all of my acting technique is just learned by doing and being hired to do things. And just having a natural sort of proclivity for it, having an ability to it. Because I do think I remember Jodie Foster once said something about that that you either have it or you don't, basically. Like if you like good actors, they have it, and you can sort of like move the margins of your talent a little bit with classes and with training, but mostly it's you got it or you don't. And and then she went on to say something about, that acting classes are rip-offs, or, a lot of theater schools are not worth it. But I wouldn't go that far. But I do kind of agree with her. I think you can either, because I actually was just talking to friends the other night, like some comedy writer friends of mine, because we were talking about stand-ups doing acting and how some stand-ups are, there are stand-ups who aren't great stand-ups who are fantastic actors. And there are stand-ups who are amazingly hilarious stand-ups who are not good actors. Mm-hmm. And they're not the same thing, but they can stand on stage and they can command an audience's attention. They can deliver jokes really well. But when they have to be the guy behind the counter at the pharmacy, they just cannot be natural,
Well, I've heard Larry David, when he talks about casting for Curb, he said, I don't like to hire stand-ups because they don't know how to deal with the improv of it all. And then they decide to just be like stand-up comedians, and they think they have to be funny. And he's like, I don't want them to be funny. I want them to just be in that improv mode in the moment. And then, people are riffing off each other, and then that becomes what's funny because that's the magic.
They also don't know how to play with other people.
Right. Well, that's a great point.
Yeah.
So speaking of playing with other people, you spent a lot of years playing with Conan O'Brien.
Yeah.
Throughout history, we've seen great partnerships, comedy teams, musicians. How do you explain, what do you think is at the nucleus of the chemistry that you and Conan clearly had and have in a way that few people have with other people?
Well, I would say it's the right cocktail of differences and similarities. In that we are, there's the physical sort of difference, there's like, I'm more horizontal and he's more vertical. Mm-hmm. Although I still, to this day, I'm 6'1" and people are always shocked. They think that I'm 5'7" or something,
Interesting.
I mean, I still to this day get viewed, you're tall. And like, yep, I am. But so there was a kind of a physical difference. There was just sort of, I don't know how to put it other than, like a performance different. He runs at a much higher RPM than I do. Mm-hmm. So those two things offset each other. But we do share a deep, deep admiration for each other's sense of humor. We both think each other are among the funniest people we've ever met. So that's exciting. That's always good to be when, the people that you think are the funniest in the world, especially if you like them and like to spend time with them, because there's some really funny people that are hard to be around.
Mm-hmm, sure.
But the really funny person that you can just to get to hang out with them, it's what we all want. It's the key to like what all the people that aren't completely damaged, they just want to be around funny people. Sure. That's the whole key to it. That was working on the Conan show for years and years. It was probably, I didn't really do a lot outside of that because I was getting to hang out with truly some of the world's funniest people, literally, every day. Go to work and just laugh all day at work. And then I'm not I should be writing a screenplay. I was like, fuck that. I'm having fun. I mean, and I'm close to home. I had a nice schedule. I got to see my kids grow up. But there's also kind of, generosity on his part. Because as I've said, often it really does take, a fairly secure person. And I mean, in a world of insecure people, there's not a person. I mean, I'm insecure. He's insecure. People that do this are insecure. It's one of the weird conundrums of, people who are terrified of rejection are drawn to this rejection factory.
Yes.
And then somehow manage to succeed in it, and then submit themselves to yearly award shows where they can get rejected all over again
on camera.
Except for one. You
Right.
pick 10 people and one gets to feel good and the 9 get to feel like shit, even though they're all winners. They've all won the contest. But he was very generous to allow me to be there. There's not a lot of people who would allow someone with a similar skill set to sit right there with them at night after night and understand that I could be helpful and useful to the greater cause. Because, perhaps his greatest skill is understanding what makes a comedy show work and being a producer. And I think him wanting me there, that was his producer brain saying he has value to add to this project.
Yeah, and in your bio, you're described as the sidekick. It's a badge of honor that you wear as someone in your career.
I don't mind it. Yeah, I don't mind it.
And,
yeah, it's the word. It's what it is.
And when you think about like the Johnny Carson Ed McMahon relationship, it really is hard to imagine that show without Ed McMahon. Without it, as great as Johnny Carson was, it's hard to imagine Johnny sitting at that desk and not having Ed McMahon, and therefore still being as good. Partnerships like that are so incredibly important. And it's interesting what you say about Conan as a producer, that he was able to look at that thing and see, oh, this works really well.
Yes. And I also, to speak for myself, I never had any misconceptions about what my role on that show was. I understood from the day one till the last day I was on it, I was a supporting player, and I was fine with that. There did come a time after I was on the show for 7 years where I was antsy, and I felt like I wanted to kind of see if I could trade up on my good fortune. And so I came out here because, I was young enough. I didn't have kids yet. And so it was easy to sort of be ambitious and daring and to say I had enough ambition to say, well, this has been nice. I really love doing this, but I want to see if I can be number one on the call sheet, basically. And I came out here and I did that 3 times. I was on the star of 3 different network television shows. And that answered that for me. I didn't, and I also found out when I got to be number one, I don't really care that much about that. I mean, it's nice to be listened to, but I was listened to on the Conan show. I was listened to during the late night years. I was listened to on the Tonight Show. I would say, when people would say, you were doing your own shows and then you went back to work for them, I'm like, yeah, because I can think of something on the drive to work and it'll be on TV that night.
Right.
And nobody gets to do that.
Yeah.
Nobody. And it wasn't just that there was that accessibility. It was truly that if I really wanted it to be on the air, they would let me do it. And it wasn't, and I had enough, and there was enough trust there in my taste and my ability, my own talent, and to be a writer and a producer, that if I said, no, I really want to do it this way, they would go, okay. Cause I had a track record of not falling on my face repeatedly. So as I said, that's nobody gets that. Nobody gets a situation where they're like, because also too, I was open to, when you're coming up with a million ideas in comedy and you come up with an idea you think is hilarious, and then you turn to people in the room and they're like, it's okay. You go, okay, I'm not always right.
Mm-hmm.
But there are times when you're like, look, I know you disagree, but I really want to do it this way. And they would let me do it. And I didn't get that on any of the shows that I was number one on the call sheet with. There was 15 different gatekeepers between me and what went on the air.
Your contributions were often so immeasurable. I mean, in prepping for this conversation, I went and I found a 12-minute montage of like Andy Richter's best lines,
Yeah.
And I was reminded of how many times, like, there could be a conversation on stage with guests or sketches where it's working, it's going well, there's laughter, but then you come in and you land that one line that just blows it all up. And that's where the contribution that you've made to that show over the years is so beloved by so many, because it's hard to imagine all those years without that and being so well,
Thank you.
Because what you do, do really well.
Thank you. I mean, I just, it's very nice to hear compliments about that kind of stuff. And
I just gave you a ducky. But I gave you a ducky.
It wasn't a big calculated thing, though. I mean, it's just, I've always been a smart ass. I mean, I've always.
Not all smart asses are funny and really funny in a non-threatening way.
I know, but my mother said, and it's not untrue, that I was in my adult life was getting paid for what I used to get in trouble for in school. I didn't act out or anything, but I did. I wasn't, if I was a teacher that I thought was dumb, I did not have any problem with occasionally letting them know that I thought they were dumb or just being a smart ass to get a laugh from the other kids. So I had years of practice at that. And again, it's a credit to Conan that he let me showcase that ability on this show for all those years.
When you started on the show, you were brought in initially to be a writer. And
yes.
But that changed almost immediately, right?
Well, the writers that came into the show, I mean, first of all, when I was hired, nobody knew what the show was going to be. And of course it was going to be a talk show, but people didn't know whether it was going to be a band. They didn't know what we were going to wear. They didn't know what the set was going to look like. They didn't know whether we would do sketches or whether we would just do desk bit. There was all kinds of stuff. And again, Conan had enough of a good quality producer's eye to know, well, it's going to find itself. And a lot of the decisions were made in reaction to other things. I mean, one of the reasons for having me sit out there was that it hadn't been done in a while. You went from Johnny and Ed to a bunch of solo people. And, David Letterman would talk to Paul Schaefer, but Paul Schaefer wasn't really, now, Paul Schaefer was the band leader.
Right.
But he wasn't really
he was Doc Severinsen.
Performer. Yeah. So that was part of it, was like, well, let's try it this way. But pretty much almost everybody in that first group of writers were also performers in some way. And it was sort of just understood that you're going to be performing on the show in some way too. And it would have been because there was some really, hilarious people in those early days. In fact, actually, for my podcast, The Three Questions, I'm going to be talking in just a little bit to Brian Stack, who is a writer on the Conan show and now writes for Colbert, who has created some of the most classic characters on both of those shows. Really beloved characters. And he's somebody that I've known since Chicago. He and I did improv together. So there was a lot of room for people to be actors in that show. And for me to be on the show too, that was kind of an experiment. That was an experiment that was kind of sometimes going on more than I even realized, and I feel kind of blessed for that because Robert Smigel, who was the original head writer, kind of, he just said because there were test shows that were just basically putting Conan in front of the camera and lighting him, and and just kind of getting him on a camera, or they had like a chef come up and do a cooking demo, just for practice.
Mm-hmm.
And we would do them up in 8H and SNL studio because Letterman was still in our studio. Robert, just from the first one of those, had me go sit with him just to keep him company, which is Conan's, as I say, he runs at a high RPM. And if he had to sit there for 2 hours just getting shot, he would get just cranky and sort of like nervous, he'd get anxious sitting there. And I understand that. I'm sort of the same way, but just at a lower speed. But it was just go keep him company, keep him happy. And that's from the first time he did that. That's what I did. And then every time thereafter, there'd be another camera test. And Robert would say, go down there, just kind of be there. And I didn't really realize that I was that my presence there was being analyzed or watched or judged. I took him on face value, go down there, keep him happy. And but also too, by that time, Conan and I had developed a rapport around the office. Like there definitely was a me and him kind of energy, even among all the other writers and the other employees. He and I played off each other well. He liked me, I liked him. And so we would do bits around the office with each other.
It was an easy transition.
It was an easy transition, and it made sense, and it was easy for me to not think that there was some sort of Machiavellian string pulling going on.
Right.
But then it got to a point where Robert was like, do you want to be like the sidekick on the show? And, for a second, I was like, I don't know. Aren't we going to also have like sketch players, and would that keep me from doing that? And he's like, well, think about it. And I thought about it for like 5 seconds and thought, who the fuck am I kidding? Yes, I would like to be on TV every night. So we did about 2 weeks. It wasn't a full, 10 days, but we did, I can't remember, we did a number of test shows, a good number of full on audience band, Mickey Rooney being a guest, kind of talk show, full on talk show practices. Rehearsals, and at the end of them, there was one at the end of one night where Lauren took me and Conan out to dinner, and we showed up at the restaurant, and it was just Lauren and Steve Martin and Conan and me, and I didn't even realize that was the point at which the world was telling me you have this job, and it wasn't until the next day that our executive producer said, "Well, it looks like you got the job," and I was like, I thought I already had the job. He's like, no, you did not have the job, but now you have the job. I was like, oh, okay, that's good. And it, like I say, it was probably for the best that I was just naive enough to not know that, I just did what I was going to do, which is kind of me anyway. I mean, it's not something I can take any credit for, but I do have the ability to, in certain situations, not get nervous. I have control over nervousness in certain situations where I just think, well, that doesn't help. Like me being nervous right now won't help. I used to drive my ex-wife crazy because she had flight anxiety. And I said to her a couple of times, like, well, your anxiety doesn't keep the plane in the air. And that's just the way my brain works.
Sure, she loved hearing that.
Oh, she sure did. And the thing she hated the most was my ability to fall asleep before the plane took off. That really annoyed the shit.
Oh, the anxious love that.
Yeah. But that's just kind of the way my brain works. It's like, well, why would I be nervous about that right now? It doesn't. And I understand anxiety is not something everybody control. That's why I say I'm lucky that I have that in certain situations, not in other situations. Sure. In certain situations, I have that ability.
Over the years, when you were sitting on that chair, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit before, were there guests you'd look over and just think to yourself, oh my God, I'm sitting next to?
Oh, absolutely. The first one is Michael Caine. I just can't believe that I sat next to Michael Caine. And those are the guests too that I would just go, hi. and not really engage with, because I just like, what am I going to say? And then there were amazing ones, like James Brown, Tony Curtis. It was usually like all these kind of old sort of faces in the Mount Rushmore of show business. But there were others that kind of like David Bowie used to be on the show a fair amount and would do bits on the show because he was local and he was fun and open and liked comedy and liked being funny, and got to know him enough that it was like, could just have as he would say, a regular bloke conversation with him about boots or whatever. And the same thing, Tony Bennett. I used to bump into Tony Bennett and it was like, hey, Andy, hi, Tony, it was fucking Tony Bennett. It was crazy.
Tony Bennett knows my name.
Yeah.
And not that I'm going to ask you to name names, which is irrelevant, but if you want to volunteer, then that's fine. What about the flip side to that, where you'd sit there and go, God, what a fucking asshole? There must have been a lot of those too.
There's less than you would think, because I didn't have to the segment producers would have to deal with the real assholes, because they have to go into a tiny room with them and talk to them about us having expectations of them being entertaining. Or the poor pages that had to take their lunch back 3 times, that I was just sitting out there. So most of the, you had to be a real asshole for it to get through to me and to my sort of protected, very limited exposure to these people. And most of them were just boring. Most of the people that were assholes were just, I worked with James Caan on the movie Elf, and one of the things that he told me that I really took with me is he was one of my heroes. Like he was, the movie Thief being made in Chicago was an inspiration to me in that, like, well, if that can be made and I can recognize all the places that they are, if that can be made in my hometown, then it's doable, and I just loved him. He's just was such a great, one of the best movie stars. And getting to work with him, and then he was everything I would have wanted him to be, just funny and warm and giving and just an open book. And one of the things he told me was, he said, I've done however many of these, and he said, and I've been fucked up plenty. He goes, like, I had terrible years there. And he said, but I never was late, and and I never pulled any of that, like, I won't leave my trailer until they leave their trailer kind of bullshit. He goes, I never got into any of that stuff. And he said, and everybody that does it because they're scared that they don't have it. And I was like, I believe that 100%. And in my own experience, it was backed up in my own experience and my own hunches. And most of the people that were rude were just so, they come in, they're there for 6 minutes and then they're gone, and I didn't have to worry about it. And it was, and I didn't even let them take up a lot of space in my mind, I mean, and when the show was really going, I would go home, 3-4 hours after the show was taped, and my ex-wife would say, who was on the show? And I would go, and I couldn't remember. It would take me like a few minutes to think, like, oh, like I could remember what had happened during the day, but the actual show, it was so refillable and so repeatable that it was almost became a blur, like a big collective blur. And people often, they'll say, I remember the time that you were there with this guest and you said that, and then, and then there was a confetti cannon went off, and I'm like, I don't have any recollection of that at all.
You don't remember a confetti cannon?
And I can watch. Oh, I've been around plenty of confetti cannons in my day. I got one loaded up right behind me here for the end of this podcast. No, but I can watch video of myself and not, in complicated bits out on remotes out in the world and be like, don't remember that. Wow. Don't remember that.
So in our final
high volume business.
Yeah. In our final few minutes here, tell me about the podcast and 3 questions with Andy Richter. How did you come up with that concept?
I came up with that concept because I have been in a lot of therapy, and I think, I mean, not necessarily that I want everything to be a therapy session, but I think that people who are in therapy and who understand its usefulness and become proficient in its methods, you can have the best conversations with them because they're used to, again, observing and interpreting. The same thing with comedians. They step outside and try and figure, why is this like this? Why am I like this? I go through, when I go through life, I have this reaction often. Why is that? And what can I do about it? And I wanted to have those kind of conversations. I mean, not like, I don't want you to cry about your mother or anything on my podcast, but I definitely, those are the conversations that were always the most interesting to me. They were conversations that I would have, especially with repeat guests, when they weren't talking to Conan, when they moved down the couch. Those were always, I would have conversations about people. What's your workplace like? Do you like it? Just sort of the more mundane sort of things, but also for people to be incisive about those things. So the three questions are, where do you come from? Where are you going? And what have you learned? And that to me kind of encompasses all the things that the talking cure tries to do. You think about where you were, you think about what you can do with that and how it affects where you're going, and then you kind of try and call some sort of point from it all. That concept, because I used to, it's been on for 5 years now, and it used to be where I'd be pitched somebody to come back a second time, and I would say, well, this isn't really, you can't tell that same story twice. But I've gotten more loose about that, and some of the podcasts are not so much stuck to that, especially when I have like friends or people like funny friends. We might just blow that all up and just shoot the breeze and have fun and reminisce.
Well, that's what
because it's just an hour. Yeah. It's just meant to be a listenable hour. Sure. So I don't get too uptight about it. But I still do like to have that. I do find, and I mean, I've had friends on the show and learned things about them that people I've known literally decades, and learned things about them that I did not know because I got to sit within this context and say, what was your mom like? Which I don't know that I would have the nerve to ask him outside of that.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of the podcast medium, is that it's long form and it gives you the opportunity to have conversations like this. Andy, this was really great. I really appreciate you coming on. I hope we'll get a chance to do it again. And good luck with all the stuff you're doing.
Thank you so much, Andy.
All righty. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.